Hi. This is going to be a two-part lesson on blues basics. Part one will cover chord progressions and what goes into a good blues chord progression, and part two will cover some aspects of soloing over that chord progression. So just to start off with part one, we will divide this lesson up into two parts as well. So there'll be an easy part and a harder part. The easy part will be a very straightforward blues progression in the key of A. Blues is possibly unique in that it is one of the only styles where you'll see variations on the same chord progression from one song to another, again and again. And of course this is just one possible variation, but it's maybe the most common one. So we'll be actually using power chords for our blues progression because they're fairly easy to finger and move around. And they have the same fingering from one position to the next. What they basically are, for those who don't know, is a two-note chord, in this case, with a root note, which the chord takes its name from, and a note that is actually 5 steps up from that root. So if we have an A power chord or an A5 chord, we're talking about the note A as the root, and then the note E, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps up the scale. So A is 1, B would be 2, C sharp 3, D is 4, and E is 5. And those two notes make up the power chord. And the three chords in the blues progression that we're going to play are all going to be exactly like that chord. And they're going to be fingered the same way. So those chords are A5, D5, and E5. They also will be numbered in and of themselves because they represent different chords within the key of A. So the A chord will be also referred to as the 1 chord. The D chord will be referred to as the 4 chord because it's 4 steps up from A, and the E chord will be referred to as the 5 chord because it's 5 steps up from A. Just a quick word on rhythm. In the easy part, which we're doing now, the rhythm will be very straightforward. We're going to play 2 chords every measure. The first chord will be on beat 1, and the second chord will be on the and after 2. So 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3, 4 will be the rhythm that's carried through every measure of this chord progression. And otherwise, that pretty much covers it. I'm going to switch over to a shot of the music, the notes and tablature that I have made up for this first chord progression, and talk a little bit about some of the details of the theory and so forth. Incidentally, this can be downloaded at my website so that you can follow it while you watch the video if you would like to do that. Very quickly, just to repeat some of the things that I said in the last clip about the nature of a blues chord progression. We have 3 chords, A5, D5, and E5. A5 is referred to as the 1 chord because it's the chord that is has the same root as the key. And then we count up from there to the 4 chord through B, which is 2, C sharp, which is 3, and then finally to the E5, which is the 5 chord. All 3 chords, as I mentioned before, are power chords, which consists of a root note and a note that's 5 steps up from that root note, and so therefore they all have the same fingerings. Down below we have the chord progression. Here's the rhythm that I talked about where we play on 1 and then the and after 2. This chord progression is one version of the blues. There are many versions, but this one happens to have what's called a quick 4 in the second measure. Many blues progressions don't have that, but just have the 1 chord or the A5 chord in our case going through the first 4 measures, but this has a quick 4. And then the last portion of the blues progression, the last 4 measures, is in this case E5, D5, A5, E5, which is a variation of the blues referred to as a 5, 4, 1, 5 turnaround. A turnaround basically is just the portion of the chord progression that pulls your ear back around to the beginning so that the whole thing can be started over again. So there it is. That's the chord progression. In the next clip, I'm going to go ahead and play through this chord progression with a jam track that I made up for the purposes of this video 3 times to allow you ample chances at playing along without having to stop and restart over and over and over again. These tracks also will serve as backing tracks for part 2, the next video in the series, which will cover soloing over a blues chord progression. So they can also be used to practice your soloing over. Okay, so now we're ready to play through the easy blues progression. There'll be a count off you'll hear in the drum part on the hi-hat. It'll basically be a hit on 1 and 3 and then 1, 2, 3 with a snare shot on 4. So it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll start. So here we go. So now on to part 2 of our first video about the basic blues dealing with chord progressions. So with this part we're going to dress up the original chord progression with some things that make it a little more, hopefully more interesting. One of the harmonic devices that we'll use, some people would refer to as leading chords. So a leading chord or a leading tone is if we have, say, in our next measure, if we're going to go to D5 and that's our target chord, we can lead to that chord by playing a chord a half step below, in this case C sharp, or we could lead to it from above. We could play a D sharp and drop to D. You can also set up the next chord with a chord that's a whole step below, so we'll use that sometimes in the chord progression. There will also be occasions for two leading chords in a row, so in this case 5 going down to flat 5 going to 4, or E5, D sharp 5, D5. And also at the end of the chord progression we'll have what some would call a turnaround lick, where we'll take the same sort of basic idea of leading chords to wrap the chord progression up at the end. So leading from 4 through sharp 4 or flat 5 into 5. So that'll be the additions that we'll make. The rhythm will be essentially the same as before, so the framework will still be the same chord progression on this rhythm, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Just a quick word about the PDF document that has the music. Both the easy version and the hard version are part of the same document. So the first lesson is page 1, the second lesson is page 2. So I just want to talk about a few of the things that we mentioned in the previous clip. So here's the same chord progression as before, sort of making the framework of this blues progression, and then in between each chord hit we have our leading chords, chords that set up the next chord, and we take advantage of open notes and power chord fingerings now in more places than we were before. There are some of the examples of two leading chords in a row. I've labeled some of these examples with the letters LC, and here at the end is the turnaround lick that I was talking about, where you go from the 4 chord basically up through sharp 4 or flat 5 to 5, which sort of punctuates the end and gets you back around to the beginning. So now we'll do the more elaborate or dressed up version of our blues progression. This time we'll be coming in before beat 1, playing an open 6 string or E on the and after 3, and our first power chord, leading chord to the A5, will be a G5 chord, and we'll do that on 4. So it'll be, you'll hear the hi-hat count 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1, like that. So that's how we'll begin it. Here we go. So there you go. Hopefully you guys got something out of that and learned a way of approaching the way you play your chords. This, of course, can be done in a much more spontaneous way. And these are just meant to be examples that you can try out so to sort of get your feet wet and get a feel for it. So I encourage you to give it a try, download the PDFs, run through it a few times, and you can start to do this kind of stuff too, and not just in the blues. It's all transferable to other styles.